This is a podcast by The Straits Times.
You are listening to Letter from the Bureau, a podcast series which is part of The Straits Times Asian Insider channel. I'm your host and ST's foreign editor, Li Xueying. Now, the Letter from the Bureau is like a scenic detour from the hard news that keeps hitting the global headlines. Here, we talk about life as it goes on amid all the crises. I chat each month with one of ST's correspondents in the Asia Pacific, the US, and Europe, and they share with you their observations and insights on what's unfolding in their patch. In our 25th episode, we are speaking with ST's China correspondent, Aw Cheng Wei. Good to have you on the show, Cheng Wei.
Thanks for having me, Xueying.
So, Cheng Wei, you wrote about China's most livable city as voted by the Chinese in a new survey. And the results are quite surprising. It's not Beijing, not Shanghai, not Shenzhen, and not even Chengdu. It's the city Changsha in central Hunan. Can you tell me how that came about?
So Changsha has been popularly featured in a lot of China's media and television programs. It is the home of Mango TV. So a lot of people know it through Mango TV's eyes. So obviously being a TV channel, they have a lot of shows about Changsha's food, the celebrities there, a lot of the movies and television programs, drama serials are set against Changsha. So within China, Changsha has this reputation of kind of being like a bit like Chinese Hollywood in that sense, where it is the popular setting for many places. I think Chengdu used to be because of its laidback life, but mainly because of economic costs and concerns, Changsha then decided to, or rather Mango TV then decided to have Changsha as its backdrop. And it is a very, very vibrant backdrop. So the city is very well lit at night. There's a river that runs across Changsha where people can talk and chat and have supper. You know, it is a very livable city that people have in China already knew about. But I think what was surprising for me was how low the property prices there are compared with, say, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen. So you mentioned that it was surprising that these four mega cities did not make to the top. In fact, they were ranked pretty much at the bottom because of how high-strung the lives in these four cities. So Changsha being very livable, has a very vibrant economy and social life. It has risen very much to the top.
I see. So I'm going to come back to the property prices in a bit. But first, you were saying that Changsha is the Hollywood of China. So what were some of the popular shows that people in Singapore or in the region might have seen Changsha in?
I think in the region would be quite, because a lot of the Chinese movies that are popular domestically, they tend to feature certain cities. So I think Changsha is one, for example. There's this called The Tale of the Night. I think it was just released earlier this year. So they have slice of life drama serials, and also a lot of these reality TV programs where, for example, they'll talk about let's meet in Changsha or let's go back and hang out in Changsha among the celebrities. So Changsha will feature very much prominently in perhaps products that are not familiar to an international or even like Asian audience, but really within China.
So what is it about Changsha that makes it such a scenic backdrop to these shows? So you went there recently to write the story. What is the city like? Can you describe it for us?
It's very well built. A lot of the life is centered around the Huangxing Strand Street. So that's where a lot of so-called TV programs go on the street to get interviews with people who are shopping there and such. So that's one popular backdrop. You have famous brands, the international LV and all that, they're there as well. And there's also a very good mix of local brands. Things like Anta, Li Ning, they are all there as well. And the more iconic ones that perhaps are known again, perhaps more to the Chinese, is this milk tea brand called Cha Yuan Yue Se.
Oh.
So it is a Changsha product. And so a lot of people go to Changsha for that. And you will see that being featured in, for example, talk shows and TV shows about Changsha. So that's quite a defining brand that Changsha has.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, you don't get this brand outside of Changsha actually. So it has managed to be a pride of Changsha.
Does it taste different from other bubble tea brands out there in China?
It does. The tea that they use is better.
I see.
So I will compare this, for example, Mi Xue Bing Cheng, which I think in Southeast Asia, there's also a few outlets. So the tea is better. But, I am not a seasoned bubble tea drinker, but seasoned bubble tea drinker will tell you that the tea really matters when it comes to this.
I see.
And yeah.
Okay, it's interesting what goes into the branding of a city. And going back to the point about property prices, you did interview someone who talked about why she wanted to live there, and she bought a 4-room flat for about 2.7 million yuan, or about 500,000 Sing dollars. So I know that was last year, but since then, as we all know, China has been undergoing a property crisis. You have written quite a bit about that yourself as well. Prices are in free fall. So what is the situation now in Changsha? Is it still a good place for the Chinese to buy property?
It is very stable, or rather more stable compared with other Chinese cities. So the thing about Changsha is that a lot of people buy flats there not really for investments, but they are buying it because they would like to live there.
I see.
So for example, the property prices in Beijing, Shanghai and Guangzhou, a lot of them have been propped up because of the demand. People think of it as a very good investment. So you will see a very noticeable difference between, say, someone who buys a flat in Changsha because they plan to live there for the long term. Whereas like in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, people buy it mostly for investments. So I think that's a very stark difference. And in this latest round of regulatory clampdown, we see that it's under this campaign of houses are for living in and not for speculation. So Changsha has never really been a place where people went to 炒房, went to buy property there as if we are the Chinese fascination with property lah. But people have always gone there because it's more livable. A lot of it also has to do with the fact that the salaries in Changsha, they are not very high, but they're okay enough for someone who can spend 30 years paying off a mortgage in Changsha. Whereas like in Beijing, Shanghai and Guangzhou, people can work their whole lives and not be able to afford a place in these 4 mega cities. So there's also a very noticeable difference in that sense, like why you decide to lay roots in a city. Yeah.
So does it mean that the churn of people coming in and out of Changsha is a bit more stable? Or is it that people do come in, but they tend to stay put?
Yeah, so it is a lot more stable. And we saw that actually for the population last year, I think Changsha's population rose by 1.77%, which is the highest actually among a survey of major Chinese cities. So people tend to stay there, but a lot of it also has to do with the fact that it is a growing city. There's no telling how high it will reach in terms of its developed status, right? Right now, at least from what we see. But Changsha is not, say, central China's key city. So in central China, the key city is Wuhan. And Wuhan's GDP growth was 4% last year, whereas like Changsha was 4.5%. In fact, Changsha, I think, was one of the highest one. We compare this with Zhengzhou, which is the city's, or rather like it grew the least. It was Zhengzhou's GDP growth was 1% last year, which is 2 percentage points behind the national average. So actually Changsha has recorded quite a fast rate of growth.
Right.
And this trend is likely to continue if people keep moving to Changsha.
Find us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or via the Google Voice Assistant and Amazon Alexa-enabled devices. And now back to our podcast episode.
Back to my conversation with ST's China correspondent, Aw Cheng Wei, where we're talking about the place that has just been voted by the Chinese as the country's most livable city, Changsha in central Hunan. So what accounts for this fairly robust growth in Changsha? And how representative is this about the growth in middle China in general?
So we see places like Wuhan where they have reached this status that perhaps we call it the 新一线城市, the new first-tier cities that maybe comparable to Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou. So there's a lot of growth left over for cities like Changsha and Zhengzhou, where they can strive to reach that status. So what drives this economy in Changsha? A lot of it is also agriculture. There's still a very huge agricultural base because parts of Hunan remain very rural. Xiangxi is an area that can be considered much less developed, even across the nation. So when you have places like Changsha where the growth is higher, you will tend to draw a lot of people from this area, right? So it will spur your economy, service sectors and stuff like that. So these are the areas for growth in this sense, because even the GDP rebound last year was mostly due to the service sector. As we know, the primary and secondary industries are not as productive as, say, the tertiary ones. So there's a lot of room for growth. And if Changsha continues to be a popular spot for tourists and also domestic or international, then, you can see that area growing very quickly.
So aside from tourism, which is driving a lot of the growth in the service sector, what other prospects are there for young Chinese who are looking to relocate to Changsha and to find jobs there?
A lot of the Chinese, the younger Chinese, where jobs are perhaps a bit more mobile these days, they can be based in Changsha where the cost of living is lower, but still enjoy the privileges of being in like a more developed city than perhaps their own hometown. But they can still, for example, service clients in Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou.
Okay.
So basically, another person I spoke with, he is a Changsha native, but his clients are in Guangzhou.
Right.
So he goes into Guangzhou now and then, but he does most of his work remotely.
What does he do again? Sorry.
So what he does is that he does social media. He manages social media accounts for a lot of his clients. So there are companies that range from services like, for example, restaurants and whatnot to factories. So he does the back end for them. Things like managing their WeChat accounts, things like managing their Weibo presence. Yeah, so you can do these things remotely.
Yes.
What he offers to this company is a cheaper rate, say, than someone who's living in Guangzhou.
Right. And has this trend exacerbated because of COVID? I mean, obviously that has driven a lot of the trends towards remote work and finding ways to get that done, you know, having clients in Guangzhou while you're actually based in Changsha. And that essentially means that cities like Changsha, where property prices are low and the living standards are quite decent, you are really able to just stay put there and continue to get work from outside of the city.
Yes, in the sense that like it's more normalized now following COVID, right? So we see that across the world actually, despite the fact that there was so much talk about work from home, that eventually a lot of us actually went back to the office for a certain number of days. But as companies try harder to attract talent and also the cost being an issue, they're always looking for cost alternatives. And if you're a contractor, then there's really no real reason for you to be based where I am, right? So for example, if they can outsource this job to, say, Changsha or someone in Changsha at a lower price than, say, someone in, then there's no real reason why I need you in my office.
Would we say that the rise of a city like Changsha is something that we could be seeing in other cities across China as well? You know, cities with lower cost of living, lower property prices, but these decent living standards. But people will want to stay there because now they do have the option of living there, but yet still getting work outside of the city.
So one crucial advantage I think Changsha has over perhaps other less developed cities is that firstly, it's a provincial capital. And secondly, actually the quality of its graduates are good. So Hunan University is among, it's not as good, of course, your Beita, Hunan, but the quality of graduates is also good. So a lot of it also has to do with, can you get access to manpower? Say, for example, maybe I'll draw the comparison to Zhengzhou. So Hunan, again, is not a city known very much for its graduates. Even though the competition is so stiff, Hunan is one of the largest provinces that China has. But the university quality may not be, say, as good as Hunan. So Hunan graduates maybe tend to be a bit more sought after, which also helps this trend, right? In that sense, the companies may feel that I'm getting a better quality worker for lower the cost. But again, it depends on the services they provide. So for example, my interviewee, Mr. Zhou, his work is IT based. But if, say, you need someone on the factory line, then that's not possible to do, right? With the rise of the digital economy, we see this happening. I think there have also been stories documenting digital nomads and people choosing to work not in the city they are in and taking on freelance services. So we see this rise of younger Chinese who are perhaps more liberal about their view towards employment. So China has always had this culture where work is contracted. The idea of employment for farmers in that sense, is not very strong, and that's their background, right?
Yes.
So when the season works, we will work, and then after when there's no job, we'll chill for a bit. We see this happening. There are certain parallels here that we can draw, that we can see within the younger Chinese. I guess because a lot of their parents will also be a lot more well-to-do now, that they can afford not to think so much about what do I have the rest of my life if I don't work.
Right, fascinating. So Cheng Wei, one last question for you. What will you choose? You're now in Beijing.
Yeah.
Will you want to move to Changsha?
So Changsha is known as, it's really hot there, right? But that would be a serious draw. I will seriously consider moving.
Okay.
Basically, as you are recording this, we're entering into fall and subsequently winter.
Right.
So that's not quite pleasant.
Right. Okay, we will have this conversation again. Thank you, Cheng Wei.
Thank you, Xueying.
For being on the show. Thanks.
No, thanks for having me.
Well, that's a wrap for Letter from the Bureau, a podcast by the Straits Times. If you would like to read Cheng Wei's column, we have a link in our podcast show notes. You will also find a link to other articles in our Letter from the Bureau series.